Today, we are blessed with the presence and wisdom of Susi Amendola, a yoga therapist, meditation teacher, stress management expert, and the author of The Centered Heart. In this episode, she equips us with a set of tools for managing our stress while protecting our heart. This includes yoga and meditation, but also breathing, connection with nature, gentle movement, imagery, and more. Let's learn how to stress less with Susi Amendola. Let's start with the story about your first time you took marijuana and how that, to my surprise, really set things off in a dark downward spiral. And then later you found yoga and that brought things back up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really shocking for me too. I was quite young. I think I might have been 15 or 16 years old, and I went to a party. It was the summer, and I was with friends, and I smoked marijuana, and I literally, like, the whole room started changing shapes, and it was almost like I had done acid or something. And then, to my surprise, the next day I was starting to get like flashbacks and anxiety, and I couldn't drive my car to work. And I thought, well, surely this will shift. And it never did. For a very long time, it sort of shifted my whole nervous system. And I wasn't able to go to school. I couldn't work. I couldn't drive. And I started having agoraphobia and panic attacks. And it was at a time in the late 70s when anxiety wasn't ever talked about. It wasn't a thing. And so I didn't really know what was happening to me. I really thought something really scary and terrible was happening. And so I think that added to it, just not knowing and not understanding how the nervous system worked. And so it went on for quite some time. And as you know, if you've read my bio or story, I didn't have much relief. It was getting worse and worse. And I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. And my mom, who at that time, I had 5 children in 5 years, she was really stressed, and she started taking yoga classes at a nearby yoga center. And she invited me to go with, and I went with her. And it was really the first time I had felt some relief. And also at that yoga center, there was a really well-known doctor, Dr. Rudolph Ballantyne, who later went on to write a book called Radical Healing. And he was doctor of psychiatry from Duke University, who also knew about homeopathy and knew about Ayurveda and Chinese medicine. And so he had a clinic where they were helping people with using yoga practices and homeopathic remedies. And so I got some help there as well. But, it really was the practices of yoga that over time really helped support my nervous system and sort of return me to health. But it was many years later, and a lot of sort of climbing myself back to the place that I had been before. And I was really changed in some ways forever. I really never went back for a very long time to being someone who was gregarious and loved crowds and people. Now I do in my life, but back then I couldn't be in crowds for many, many years. I couldn't be around a lot of people. I became very introspective and kind of lost the person that I was when I was younger. So it took me a very long time to find my way back.
Okay. Yeah, let's pause here for a minute, because there's a few different aspects of this that I want to dig into. One is you talked about how in the 1970s, I guess there was less understanding about all of this, different mindsets about mental health that added to the anxiety and the stress. Can you talk more about that overall culture and atmosphere around mental health at that time, and how it's changed over the years?
Well, I really didn't know anyone with mental health issues, except that I had a friend in high school whose mother sat in a dark room and stared at the walls. And she ended up in a sanitarium. And eventually, I'm not even sure what happened to her, but she was taken away. And a lot of times what they would call that was a nervous breakdown. Somebody had a nervous breakdown, and they didn't return to sort of their life for a very long time. And so, that was scary. And people didn't have words for a lot of mental health issues back then. People didn't talk about depression. They didn't talk about anxiety. There was a lot of electroshock treatment being done for mental health issues. And so I did know that people were experiencing electroshock and then they were never the same again. And so I really hid my mental health issues at that time. I really hid my anxiety because I didn't want to be one of those people. And luckily, my parents weren't big into medical interventions. So my mom, who was interested in yoga, she was also interested in being a vegetarian and sort of, a lot of sort of spiritual things. So they didn't really have that kind of mindset that they needed to take me to a psychiatrist, which was really probably very good that they didn't at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I have a coworker, and the other day she was like, "Michael, have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD?" I'm like, I'm offended. No, I'm kidding. I was like, "Oh, no, but yeah, sure, I have ADHD like symptoms." But I'm like, "But I'm happy. I'm good. I like how I am. It's
Yeah.
no problem. So why would I need to be diagnosed?" And she's like, "Well, then you could get medication." I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah."
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I need medication. I have tactics to raise or lower my energy levels, or to reduce my stress, or create more stress. I have enough tools. I don't think I need the medication just yet. But thank you.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I was talking to a friend yesterday who's a professor, and she's been talking a lot about MAD studies. And MAD studies you've probably heard of, but I had heard of it but wasn't hearing a lot about it, but about really people being able to be in our society and have some kind of mental illness diagnosis and not have to like rush into some kind of treatment or protocol of drugs, because the drugs have their side effects and they have their issues and their problems. And so for me, I feel quite lucky that I dodged that bullet, because I think if I had been drugged at that time, I don't know that I would be where I am right now. And I don't know that I would be the person that I am right now. So I do really understand that. And I feel that way about my grandkids and about my children, and, that I don't want to rush. And my husband also, who's a psychotherapist, a lot of his work is around nutrition for mental health. So about really trying to understand the root causes of people's mental health issues and not throw them into treatment or into psychiatry. Not to say that those don't have some good outcomes from time to time, but there's so many things along the way that we can do that will help. And particularly some of the things that I've even mentioned in the book, are a great place to start. I think starting at the end range is never a good idea.
Yeah. And you opened up your yoga practice in 1983. From my perspective, being born in 1986, I'm like, you are one of the originals. You were doing yoga before it was popular, but you're like, no, it was popular before me. Like you mentioned, your mom was doing it, but still, that's very early on. That's like 40 years. Um, Yoga itself, the way it's done in our culture, at least in the U.S., must have changed over these 40 years. And even then, maybe when you started, it must have changed from back in the days in India, when it was deeply connected to Hinduism, and it still is, but it has drifted away a bit. So, yeah, can you talk about the way that you do yoga? Because when we use the word yoga right now, most people are going to imagine, twisting our bodies around and doing poses, which is certainly part of it. But yeah, give us a clear definition of what you perceive as yoga.
Well, that's a really great question. And I think that, the yoga that we see on magazine covers, or that we used to see on magazine covers, I think is dying in some ways. I mean, when yoga came to this country, the postures, the asanas became the focus. I mean, not in the very beginning. When I first was introduced to yoga, it was not, the postures were a part of it, but it was still deeply spiritual. It was coming, the yoga swamis all came kind of in the late 60s, early 70s, and set up ashrams all over the US. And so that kind of yoga, ashram style yoga, was really inclusive of not just postures, but breathing, relaxation, meditation, imagery, diet, lifestyle. All of those things were included. And when it got popular, and I really feel like the popularity sort of zoomed in the 90s, kind of reached an all time high, it really was the postures that kind of took hold. And it became sort of a game of, who can do the more advanced poses and what pose can you throw on the cover of a magazine. And even to this day, you still see those poses on the cover of yoga magazines. But I think that slow yoga, which I would call what I do, slow yoga has come back into fashion because of all of the kind of chronic illness that we're facing right now. That what I went through back in the 70s, a lot of people are going through all kinds of anxiety and chronic illness. And so they're looking for something that they can do. And most people can't do those really difficult poses. And quite frankly, what I've learned when I've used yoga for my own health and wellness, that doing the poses is really about listening. And I say this, in my book, and I say it all the time. In Ayurveda, which is the sister science to yoga, they say disease knocks 3 times. And if you don't listen, it takes you. And the postures are really about listening. They're really about how can I move in a way that I can listen to what my body's telling me about myself. And when we move to try to create a form or a shape, it's more like Simon Says than it is like me listening to me. It's more about me doing what a teacher wants me to do or what they want to see, instead of me having an experience and being able to connect with my own body. So I really feel like this style of practice, this sort of slow yoga, where we come back to ourselves, because there's so much trauma now, and people, when people are in trauma, they exit their bodies because it's uncomfortable to be there. So this being able to come back in takes a lot of kind of slowing down and being willing to listen and being willing to take the time to be with ourselves. And so I think that style of yoga is becoming more and more popular again. And I sort of laugh, my husband and I sort of laugh because, gosh, you've been doing the same kind of yoga for 40 years. When all of that hot yoga came in, you just kind of held your guns and did what you do. And now everybody who was doing that is doing what you do now. And I said, yeah, it is fun to watch. And it's funny as well. It's funny to watch too.
That's very interesting. It might also just line up with cultural and educational shifts because we've been so external focused and trying to get approval and trying to impress each other with our bodies and what we can do, and look at me, look what I can do, for quite some time. But it seems, yeah, you're right. In the past few years, past decade, perhaps, maybe, we've been invited back into ourselves and saying, hey, it's okay to take care of yourself and close your eyes and meditate and breathe and listen to yourself and have this self-compassion. And maybe that wasn't as acceptable, 20 years ago or something, or it would have been seen differently. But now it's, I think we're very lucky that it's become, we've been invited back into ourselves, culturally even. And people aren't going to be looking at us strangely or not impressed by us if we're, just doing this internal kind of focused practice. Yes, the body is important. We should, exercise and look good and stuff. But it seems, yeah, you're right. That's become less of the focus. It's a bit more balanced nowadays. But you're deep in this world, so maybe your perspective is different. But that's mine.
I love what you said about we're being invited back into ourselves, because I think that, Michael, that's a really beautiful analogy of what's going on. I think that we left ourselves for a while for something that we thought we could get or gain. And even early on when I was doing yoga and it was a little bit more spiritual, there was also this drive to get enlightened. And even that has sort of fallen away now with this whole thing that we went through with, hot yoga and power yoga and, all of us sort of striving. A lot of that is being put aside for our own health and well-being. And I think that that's I love, I'm going to use that, Michael, invited back into ourselves. We're invited back into ourselves.
Yeah, I'm also going to use this listening too. I'm going to use the word listen in a broader way, the way that you are. And you have these different tools you've learned from yoga and over the years that you talk about, such as breathing, imagery, movement, like gentle movement, deep relaxation, meditation, compassion, and nature. And I think one thread that connects all of these things together is listening. You're listening to the world around you. You're listening to the animals and the plants and the sun and the clouds. And you're listening to yourself. You're giving yourself compassion.
Mm-hmm.
You listen to others, being compassionate towards them.
Yeah.
The way you breathe, the way you move. Listening seems to be sort of one core principle that ties all of this together.
I like that. I love that. I think, listening, you just said it, and listening to ourselves really sets the groundwork and the context for being able to listen to others. If we can't hear ourselves and we can't listen to ourselves in our own bodies, how are we ever going to hold space for anybody else if we can't hold space for ourselves? And one of the things people used to talk about all the time is, how people get compassion fatigue or they burn out, when they're therapists. But really, if we're caring for ourselves, we never burn out. We always have room for caring for others when we're caring for ourselves.
Yeah. I love that. I love how we're talking because it's working. This is my style. I'm supposed to ask questions, and you're like, okay, answer the question, and then next question. But I notice I tend to like just comment, and then I'm hoping that you'll just comment back, and you are playing along with me. Sometimes it's harder with other people. I'll say something, and then they'll be like, "Where's the question?" I'm like, oh, okay. So it's lovely that you're listening to me and you're listening to yourself and the ideas that are emerging just through this little virtual interaction.
Hmm.
Um, another thing you talk about, which might be a side point, but something I found very lovely is this listening to the sun and listening to how your body reacts and your mind reacts to the movement of the sun, saying, "Hey, when there's a sunrise,
Mhm.
this is happening inside of me. When there's a sunset, this is happening." I haven't heard you talk about the sun being directly overhead at noon or something, and maybe I'm reading too much into this. You're like, dude, I'm not like a sun worshiper person. But yeah, tell me more about your relationship with the sun and the relationship that a lot of our bodies has with the sun. If we listened, we might realize, but it seems you've been listening closer than a lot of us.
Well, I think this is really, we are so connected to nature that we can't help be connected to the rhythms of the sun and the moon. And also, all of the elements affect us. And, Ayurveda, which is a sister science to yoga, they talk about our connection to nature and all of the elements. And yoga particularly points to how our breathing patterns change at sunrise and sunset and how our nervous system is affected by, different things that are happening outside of us. And so it's a very, very unique kind of perspective. But I think it's important to recognize that yoga recognizes and Ayurveda recognizes that all of the elements that exist in nature also exist inside of us. So in terms of the sun, we have a fire element, and our fire element affects our vision, our ability to see is part of the fire element. Our eyes burn images so we can see. It also affects our minds because our minds burn ideas and thoughts, right? So that we have this stream and flow. That brilliance of thought comes from the sun. It also affects our emotions. Our ability, that up and down is our fire element. So that affects us. Our stomach, to be able to burn food, like into energy. Our digestion is fire. In yoga, they call it Agni. And I can't even tell you how many forms of Agni or fire they talk about in the yoga tradition. And that, everything sort of starts in the gut and in the fire system. And fire affects, our skin. Like, if we have a rash, it's because we have too much fire, too much heat. So, there's so many ways that we're affected by the sun. And then, I think what you're referring to, Michael, is this idea of, there is an effect at sunrise and sunset. It affects our breathing. Like we have a right nostril breath and a left nostril breath. And the right nostril breath is connected to the sun, the left, the moon. The right nostril breath is the sympathetic nervous system, and the left is the parasympathetic. And there's a central passageway that we talk about in yoga that is when the two are in balance. When the sun and moon elements are in balance, then both nostrils open evenly. And it's really interesting because we're meant to, our nostril dominance switches every hour and 45 minutes or so. So we breathe predominantly on one side for an hour and 30 hour and 45 minutes. And then the dominance switches and it goes to the other side. This is part of our natural nasal rhythm, our nasal cycle that is directly connected to the sun. And so it's directly connected to the nervous system. And so there's a few times when both nostrils open evenly. One is when that nostril dominance is switching from one side to the other. And we all are really aware of this when we have a cold. So if you have a cold, you'll notice that like one side is more closed and the other side is open. It's like you're breathing through the one side for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, it feels like both nostrils are open evenly. And you're like, oh, thank God. And then it switches and the one side shuts and the other side opens. That's always happening. We just notice it when we have a cold because it's more obvious. But it's happening because it's what's keeping our nervous system in balance. We don't want to always breathe through the right side, and we don't always want to breathe through the left side, and we don't always want to breathe through the center. But we want there to be a balance. We want it to balance. And so, like the right nostril breath is responsible for active functions, heating functions, solar functions, and the left nostril for cooling functions, for relaxing functions. So, like the left nostril might open when you're listening to music or in an interesting conversation. And the right nostril would open when you're active, doing something really busy or studying or working with your mind, where there's a lot of heat needed. Or when you're digesting, you want your right nostril open. So this the yogis knew about for centuries. And so this is part of the science of breath. And it's something that, we try to study, but our forms of measurement in the West are very different. In the East, they value personal experience a lot more than we do in the West. We value research. And while research is important and it's helpful, there's an internal kind of research that I think is really valuable for all of us, to be really turning our attention inward and paying attention to what's going on inside of us. And so we might notice, hey, I'm about to get on a plane. I'm going to be flying 500 miles an hour through space. I probably should think about opening my right nostril so that that's supporting that process of flying through the air. I had a teacher, a Swami that I studied under, who would not get on a plane if he couldn't open his right nostril before he was flying. So, those are things that the yogis knew all about, that are things that we don't really look into. We don't explore that much. Unless sometimes, I think illness and sickness kind of catapults us into paying attention to ourselves in a different way.
Wow. So it's about sunrise, or the sun should be rising here soon. And I am breathing evenly throughout my nostrils. I guess it's about sunset over there. I imagine something similar might be happening for you, which is, maybe that also contributes to the lovely experience of that time of day.
That's a great, I want to just accentuate that, Michael, because most of us are so drawn to sunrises and sunsets. And I think part of that is because there's a kind of equilibrium at sunrise and sunset. And it happens in our nostril dominance and it happens in our nervous system. And I remember going to this small town in Wisconsin that people used to go to, they still go to. It's like a beachfront and it's beautiful. And every day at sunset, the whole town comes out and stands on the beach and they watch the sunset, and they watch it at sunrise too. But at night, when it sets, they clap. They stop for a moment and there's complete silence for about 3 minutes. And then everybody starts cheering. And it was in Door County in Wisconsin. And I was so profoundly touched by that because I thought, well, they get it. They know that there's something magical that's happening at that moment. And of course, in the tradition of yoga and Buddhism, practice is always said to be best and most supportive at sunrise and sunset, because both nostrils open evenly. And that's when we're in that sort of perfect balance for that experience of meditation.
It might also be a tool into, if we can't intercept and feel how we are, where our nervous system is, whether it's very sympathetic or parasympathetic, maybe we can put our fingers or hand up to our nose and feel, oh, where is the air coming out? Right now, it's coming out of both nostrils. But sometimes I do this at other times of day or other times of my life, and it'll be only coming out through the left or only coming out through the right. That could be like a little measurement of, oh, this is where I am right now. There's a lot of technologies and sensors and smartwatches and EEGs and MRIs and things that are trying to tell us about, this is what you are, this is what your brain is. But this is like a real-time and influenceable, changeable sort of window into all of this. So it sounds like what you're also saying is, one maybe I'm reading into this, you could use this as sort of a metric into your nervous system and where you are. But then also you can maybe deliberately maybe plug up one nostril or induce right nostril breathing or left nostril breathing or some kind of balanced breathing.
Yeah. And in fact, there are a lot of yoga teachers right now that do teach a certain kind of breathing. Like if you're depressed or you're anxious, you would do a little more left nostril breathing if you're a little bit anxious, because it would trigger that response or the opposite. And I think that's incredibly important. In fact, it was really interesting. I was just teaching at a yoga therapy conference and I was with a woman who was a researcher, a yoga researcher, and I was talking about the importance of like down regulating the sympathetic nervous system. And she said, not all people need to downregulate, even though the majority of people do need some help in downregulating that sympathetic nervous system. But some people need to upregulate it. If they're suffering with certain kinds of illnesses that's suppressed. So I thought that was really interesting because I'm really talking more about managing stress and heart disease and chronic illness. And I am talking a lot more about because the sympathetic nervous system is always turned on, because we have to be able to respond quickly. So it's always turned on. But the parasympathetic is not, and we have to do things to turn it on. So a lot of what I'm talking about in my book and I talk about in my teaching is what are some practices that help you upregulate that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest phase of the nervous system. But it isn't true for everything. And the same with breathing practice. The breathing practices vary depending on what you want to create or support. And you're right, you can change dominance. And I think another thing worth saying is that you can manually close off one side, but there is a link between the breath and the mind. And you could just sit for a moment, close your eyes, and think, I want to breathe just through my right nostril now. And if you did that for 1 minute, sometimes two, it'll shift the dominance just with your mind. So these are really important things, I think, that we've lost. Like you said, in our modern times, we're using more and more gadgets and things and AI and all these things, and we're losing touch with ourselves. We're losing track of ourselves. I love all of these modern, I'm like everyone else. I love having a phone and I love being able to use all these gadgets, but I also feel like, I was thinking the other day, if our internet went down, how many of us would even remember a phone number to call, like our own phone number or our mother's phone number? But when I was a kid, we memorized hundreds of phone numbers. Nobody does that anymore. We've lost some of that. So we've lost some of those really kind of innate things about, and I think the book is talking a lot about things like that. Even just lying down and looking up at the sky. We're so focused on looking down at our phones, we don't take time to look up. And the process of looking up opens our minds, just that ability to look up and see clouds. It creates more spaciousness in the mind. The gaze is unfocused and expansive. But when we look down, we're narrowing our gaze. And so we're not like opening ourselves to more possibility, to that sort of spacious consciousness that can happen.
Yeah, so we were focusing on the breath a minute ago, but parallel things are happening with every other part of our body. And I guess it's not really parts, we're all as one system.
Mm-hmm.
But like while probably it's more right nostril focused or it's more inhale focused, which is going to be increasing this energy and action and sympathetic stuff. The eyes also, when they move outward versus inward, that's sort of a similar thing going on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Even like I often think too, when people soften their gaze, there's a lot of times when our gaze is so sharp, and we're so focused forward that we lose our perception. So a lot of times when I teach yoga, some of the practices I have people do, not things like standing on your head, but like take your hands out in front of you. And as you open your arms, look forward with a soft gaze and see how long you can see your fingers in your peripheral vision. For how far can you move and still see your fingertips in your peripheral vision as you open your hands? And that helps to open and create some space in the mind.
And one simple exercise, which is like the one we were built with, is just to look at the world around you without the screen. You're just looking at whatever. You can look at the sky, which might be even more powerful, but even look at the leaf, look at the people, look in the eyes of the
Yeah.
creatures around you or
Yeah.
whatever. Because like you'll go to like it bothers me, and maybe I feel like, am I insane or are they insane? I don't know, but I'll go, especially when traveling to somewhere beautiful, somewhere natural, or something somewhere ancient or whatever. 95, 99% of people are looking at it through their phone, not just to take a quick picture and to get back to the experience, but the experience never happened. It's just the whole thing is just captured through the phone. Or it's like those yoga poses. They're doing their little poses in front of the thing and then it's posting it on Instagram. It's like all about this external validation or something. I'm like sad and disgusted by it, but I'm also thinking, is something wrong with me? Why am I, maybe I should be taking pictures. Maybe I should be living through my screen. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know. I love this beautiful, it's like eye contact. We have eyes. This is one sort of portal into like connection and
Yeah.
softening and listening. But you can also do it with non-eye objects, just anything. It's like even like some beautiful curvy little building or some little cat on the street or whatever, little baby looking at you or
Yeah.
whatever. Anything beautiful.
I love what you're saying, Michael, because there's something in yoga called drishti, which is your gazing point. And so each one of the poses, they'll often, there'll be a drishti that accompanies it. So, like when you do cobra, you'll take your gaze up, towards your third eye or towards the heavens. And, when I was talking like some things twisting, you look behind you. So it's like, you're not forward focused. You're looking behind you for a moment and seeing what's going on around you when you twist. So I love what you're talking about because I think that you're right. When we focus on our phones or we're looking at the world through a phone, we lose perspective. We don't have perspective in the same way. And so I love that you're saying that you wonder, like, is there something wrong with me? No, there's something right with you. There's something wrong with looking through a phone for everything. There's something really beautiful about having an experience. And when we fully experience like that, when we drop in and we're not looking through our phone, our memory is there. I've noticed when I take pictures and I take photos, like I went to see my little granddaughter in England. She was doing a performance and I was taking so many videos and I didn't remember the performance. And it used to be that I would rely on my memory. Like I would be like, oh, that was such a beautiful experience in memory. And now it's like, oh, I have to look in my phone to see what happened, because I took a video of it. And so I love what you're saying because I think it's really important that it's great to have pictures and things like that, but it's also really important to drop into the moment and experience it fully while it's
Yeah.
happening.
No, and it's, for me, it feels like, I know these buildings or these plants. These plants might feel me. They might notice me. I don't know, but maybe they're not looking at me. But I feel this like kind of love between me and the world, and like, oh, hey there, hey guys, how are you? And there's like kind of this feeling of connection, this feeling of compassion, and I don't know. I'm not trying to like treat them like people or humanize the world or something, but I feel, whoa, hey guys, oh, whoa. It's a nice feeling. I feel good inside. But when I do the phone thing, like you go to the zoo and you're taking pictures of the animals, or you're taking pictures of yourself, even in a certain way, it's like this feeling of objectification, like killing the spirit. It's just down and this dark feeling, and I don't like that dark feeling. And maybe it's just how I'm wired, but I imagine other people are also wired somewhat similarly, where you feel this like kind of love and connection and compassion when you're just there.
I love that's a beautiful thing to say. And I love that you said that. It's just, yeah, I think it's really true. I think there's so much truth in that. And we are so connected to the world around us. And if we're on our phone or we're zoned out somewhere else, we miss it. And you're right. I think that everything around, they're living things all around us. There's animals and plants and trees. And I read somewhere recently that, trees, it takes a really long time for them to register that we're there. So it takes like 20 minutes, I think they said, or even longer. The bigger the tree is, the older the tree is, our energy doesn't imprint as quickly. So we have to sit there longer. And I thought, oh, how beautiful for us to want to, connect to a tree. We have to kind of be there for a little while. We have to sit with it for a little while so that it actually feels our presence and we feel its presence.
Yeah. Another argument for taking at least pictures, which are lovely things, is people say, "Well, it's so I can remember it. I can remember my life, remember my things." And I'm thinking, how much do these pictures capture of like the meaningful moments of life? Because most of the things that I find like beautiful are things that just are not capturable. They happen so quickly, or it'd be inappropriate to take this photo. It doesn't capture all the emotions and doesn't capture those little small little those little smiles here and there, these weird things happening. Your thoughts, your imaginations is all not there. So I tend to use a journal or a diary or whatever you want to call it to capture some of this. But like you're saying, even if you don't write it down in words, which sort of re-evoke that imagination, and you can feel it again. I can feel it again through words, written by someone else or written by myself. If written by myself and connected to my direct experience of the past, and like, whoa, that's way richer than a photo. So when they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, I tend to reverse this and say a word's worth 1,000 pictures. But yeah, maybe I'm weird there. But yeah, you're saying also like maybe don't even write it down. That memory will be there because it was such a vivid, immersive, connecting experience that you just cannot forget.
It's an experience. It's like meditation. Like people, same thing happens in meditation. People get caught up in the practice of meditation, and meditation is an experience. So they might recite a mantra and they keep reciting it, and they don't pause for a moment to have the experience and let the mantra just go. And so that they can be in the experience. It's the same thing. And I think it can happen if we write too much too. We can write and not have the experience. So I think that the experience is there for it. Like we can capture it and it's in our memory, it's in our cellular memory when we have an experience like that fully. And we can, cellular memory is there for us. It's always there. So I think that that's something that we need to remember, that we've got that and we can tap into that. The yogis knew that.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit more about the ways that we can do meditation. Like with yoga, there are certain stereotypes of what meditation is. I think that's widening. Recently, we realize there are different types of meditations, just as there are different kinds of breathing practices and exercises and ways to do yoga. But
Yeah.
yeah, tell me more about the way you perceive and the way you do meditation.
I talk about different techniques because everybody's different. And you touched on that a little bit. But I think that, I've worked with people with a lot of health challenges. And, if somebody has COPD, they can't breathe, and you give them a meditation on their breath, it's only going to make them anxious. It's not the right practice for them. So I think that having a lot of different practices, because meditation is simply just letting your mind rest somewhere. It's giving your mind somewhere to rest while you sort of step back and bear witness. And you just watch as thoughts arise and dissipate. And of course, by not interacting with thought, by just sort of watching, all of those thoughts start to lose their grip and their hold over us. And as the thought kind of unwinds, we experience this sense of expansion and peace, this expansion of consciousness and this expansion of peace and connection. And so there's a lot of ways to do that. And yes, following the breath is certainly one way, but it isn't, if you're asthmatic or you're suffering with breathing issues or you're quite ill, the breath could trigger a lot of panic and discomfort. So there are all sorts of meditation practices that you could use. One is walking meditation, being able to just walk slowly enough so that the mind has to focus, the mind has to stay present. There's a practice that we call meditation on a candle flame, where you just hold your attention to a flame and then you gently close your eyes and let that flame just move either into your heart or behind your eyes. And when it dissolves or disappears, you open your eyes again. And that's a great one for people who also, a lot of people who have trauma or PTSD, they don't want to close their eyes. It's not healthy for them because it triggers too much. So for them, using something where they can keep their eyes open and then just sort of test the waters with closing their eyes a little bit and then reopening their eyes is a really powerful practice. Meditation on a feeling is really helpful for some people. Maybe someone who's unable to sort of be in touch with their feelings, maybe they can connect to a feeling of joy sometime in their life. Maybe it was when they were with a grandparent, or maybe it's when they, my friend used to say it was when she gets at the amusement park and she gets on the Steven Tyler roller coaster. And I was like, even that could be a meditation object. The Steven Tyler roller coaster was her thing. And it brought such joy. So that feeling of joy, it's in our cells. Like I talked about our cellular memory. if we can call upon that and then use that to let our attention just rest in that joy, that's a form of meditation. And when the mind wanders, you notice without judgment or comment and come back. Another form of meditation is mantra or prayer. I mean, some people, mantra can be triggering for people because they are religious and they maybe have a fundamentalist religion where they don't think that mantra is something they can connect to. So they can use a prayer or they can use a word, just repeating or reciting it over and over so the mind can rest somewhere. It's this idea of letting the mind rest on something so that it can kind of settle. So it's not from thought to thought to thought to thought. We're not like a victim of our thoughts. We can then sort of step back and observe and bear witness. And that's, and in that moment, in those practices, we can touch something very deep and a profound experience of that kind of stillness and peace. And that's meditation.
Right. And this might be a way, just like earlier, I was talking about how you can like listen to your nose or whatever to find out how you are. This might be a time to realize like, oh, this is what works for me. We have these tools, nutritional tools or behavioral tools or whatever, and it's known that this causes this. This is good for this, and this is bad for this. But sometimes it's complete opposite for some people. Maybe the breathing doesn't work for you. Maybe it doesn't relax you. Maybe it actually stresses you out. Maybe this food actually is terrible for you. Or maybe they say, oh, well, looking into each other's eyes is going to be healing, but it might be triggering for you. So maybe just by closing your eyes or opening your eyes and doing this kind of letting go, kind of just stop, relax kind of meditation, you might be able to just go where you need to go and find, oh, this is what works for me. Man, I guess we could do this through our waking life, through our walking around working life too. But maybe it's easier when we're just sitting alone with our eyes closed in silence.
Yeah, I think walking around, we're taking in too much through our senses to really have that moment of stillness that we need. Sometimes, if we're in walking meditation, where we kind of narrow our field and we're just walking, in very slow steps, we're not taking in as much and we have the ability to focus more. I think that can be conducive to meditation. I have a lot of people who will say to me, like, well, my meditation is knitting and my meditation is my stress management is boating, and those are things that don't retrain our mindset or our nervous system. So these practices of meditation can be really profound if we use them and we kind of stick to one that works for us. We can really have an experience of moving deep into these deeper realms. They always say, there's all these old proverbs that say, you can't find water if you're digging a bunch of shallow wells, or you can't catch a rabbit if you're chasing five. So you want a technique that really helps you to narrow that field and come sort of to more of a precise kind of point of focus. And it's through that the mind expands and opens, relaxes, and spreads out. And we have an experience of a kind of universal consciousness.
You've been doing yoga nidra for decades, way longer than Andrew Huberman. He calls it non-sleep deep rest. I think he changes aspects of it, but it's become popularized now through, I think, specifically Andrew Huberman. But you're an OG with all this. So can you tell us what is yoga nidra? Tell us about yoga nidra.
Well, yoga nidra is really yogic sleep. And the teacher that I studied with was a yoga nidra master. He actually, they brought him to this country to study at Menninger Foundation, which was in Kansas City, where they were trying to understand the mind. And he was able to put himself in deep sleep. And he could then also recall during what looked like REM sleep, he could recall all the conversations that were going on around him, that were going on in the rooms that he wasn't even in. So he was a yoga nidra master, and he only needed 3 hours of sleep a night, not even that sometimes. And I think that the practice of yoga nidra is a way of sort of restoring ourselves and being able to restore ourselves with deep sleep. And it relaxes the body and mind even deeper than sleep. And so when I learned relaxation techniques, we just called them relaxation, but in short, they were really in many ways yoga nidra practices to do deep relaxation. And one of the things that I found in working with people who have heart disease is one of the things that they really need is rest. And one of the things they're not getting is good sleep. And I think a lot of people suffer from a lack of sleep. And so Yoga Nidra really helps to restore us in ways that even sleep can't. Sometimes when we sleep, we're not even resting. For a lot of us, our sleep can be just filled with, anxious dreams and, restlessness. And so Yoga Nidra is really about powering down the body and the mind so that the body is in a deep state of sleep and the mind is in deep rest, but it's able to bear witness. The mind is awake, it's alert, but it's deeply relaxed. And that is a real, it takes practice to be able to do that. And some of the practices that I talk about, the relaxation practices, are just that. And that also is a prerequisite to meditation. It really helps us. Most people will do these yoga nidra practices and then they are right at the doorstep of meditation. One of the things I love about yoga, I tried practicing a Zen meditation for many years with a very lovely Zen master who ran the Minnesota Zen Center and came to Omaha regularly. It was just absolutely lovely. His name was Katagiri Roshi. And I realized that in Zen, you sit down and you sit there until your mind's quiet. But yoga does this thing where it romances the mind into meditation. So it gives you a little bit of movement. So the body kind of de-stresses, and then you do a little breathing. So the nervous system starts to relax. And then you do some relaxation. So the body settles. And then you sit up and you're right at the doorstep of meditation. You're not fighting with your mind to be still. Your mind is just there. And so I really appreciate Yoga Nidra and relaxation for what it does for delivering us. It romances the mind into meditation in a very beautiful way.
Yeah, and you heard the Dalai Lama talk once, and you mentioned that he said this, practice dying and letting go every day. And it seems like that's sort of a key component to all of this too. It's just letting go and just letting your body mind take you where it goes, and then that might be yoga nidra. That might be this healing of the heart, the physical heart, the spiritual, mental heart. Yeah, letting go. And how do we? Because you can't say to someone let go. It's like they're holding on. We're holding on to our ideas and our things and the way we live. And it's, easy said. How do we practice dying and letting go?
Yeah, I think what we just talked about is exactly how we do it. Like when the Dalai Lama said, practice dying every day, I thought, oh my gosh, that's what we call the corpse pose in yoga. The corpse pose is the practice of learning to die, the practice of dying to the past, dying to the future, so you can be fully present right here and right now. And we all eventually have to let go of everything. We have to give up all the things we have, all the people we have, all the ideas we have. And, when people die, there's all sorts of research on as people die, they, have these sort of experiences where their life flashes before them. I mean, that's a big, and I really believe that we at death have to start to face all the things that have sort of piled up inside of us. And one of the things that relaxation does is it helps us to let go of them daily so that we don't have this stockpile of stuff that we have to sort through. And meditation does the same thing. It lets us sort of unwind slowly over time so that when death comes, and I know the Dalai Lama used to say this, he said this in that same talk that you're talking about. He said, I hope that at the time of death, I'm able to really let go. And I thought to myself, well, if you can't, none of us can, if it's not something, and I felt like he was right. We really hope that these practices at the time of our reckoning, they really are there for us, that we're really, and they talk about mantra in the yoga tradition as being the boat that takes you from this life to the next. And that it helps you cross that sea, that it's there for you because you're saying it over and over again. And that at death, sound is one of the last things that we have, hearing and sound, that it can sort of bring us across that ocean to the next life or to the next existence.
Look at this beautiful color behind me through the window as the sun is rising. I never consciously thought of this because I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm talking to you at the same time, but this is a beautiful color. It's a balanced color. It's a mix of yellow and red and blue. And it's like, ooh. So just as you were talking about how the breath and the nervous system and everything is all in its balance at this time, the color itself is balanced. And if you had to put a color on my feeling and my mood at this time of day, the sky is that color. And like it's just naturally that. How amazing. Oh my God. That's so cool.
I thought it was a fake background. It's so beautiful. Beautiful.
No, it's a real background. Yeah. And there's like it's like the sky and these buildings, but down below the buildings there are a few animals. I'm in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia right now. It's pretty much been taken over by the humans. But there are like some stray cats, and of course the birds always survive. They've been surviving since the dinosaurs. They can't kill them. The roads aren't gonna kill them. They're pretty resilient. But there's a lot of greenery here, a lot of big parks and trees, and it's just green and blue throughout that cityscape. But yeah, no, the sky is real. You're in Nebraska. What took you to Nebraska? You grew up in Illinois, which is not that far. But yeah, what drew you to Nebraska, and what do you love about it there?
Well, I lived in Chicago, and then when I found yoga, the place that I studied opened a yoga center, an institute in Pennsylvania in the Poconos. So I went there, and while I was there, I met my husband at the time. We're now divorced, but very good friends. I see him all the time. He's lovely. We moved to Nebraska because his family was here. And so when we came here, I started a yoga center here. And so we've been here ever since. But I met Dr. Ornish from Ornish Lifestyle Medicine because he had a study that he did in California, a heart study using really a lot of the practices of yoga. And he had a yoga Swami that he followed himself, Swami Satchidananda, who really inspired his wanting to do a study and see if he could reverse heart disease using lifestyle. And so the lifestyle was really from the yoga ashram, the lifestyle of yoga ashram. So anyway, I met him when I was here, and his program, they did a program here with Mutual of Omaha study. It's called the Lifestyle Heart Trial, where they were trying to reverse heart disease in the hospital here in Omaha with Mutual of Omaha was an insurance company, and turned out we saved the insurance company $31,000 per year per patient in the first year, and it was a huge success. And I went on to work in that hospital for 12 years as a yoga therapist and a stress management specialist. But I had ended up staying in Nebraska, even though I went on to be a national director of stress management for the Ornish program for up until now. I'm still doing that. And their headquarters is in San Francisco, but I've always worked from Nebraska and traveled back and forth. And yeah, so that's how I'm here. And today, Michael, it's 98 degrees and humid in Omaha. I went out and walked this morning, and I kind of wished I hadn't. I was like,
Don't do
this
it.
might have been the day to stay in.
Yeah. And you were saying that there's a pretty direct connection between physical, biological heart health and this other kind of heart. Your book is called The Centered Heart. The physical heart there is a component of this, and like you said, you're saving these hospitals money. How does heart health, cardiac health, connect with all of these practices that we've been talking about? And even before this recording, you were mentioning I talked about how my mom died from cancer, and you were saying how cancer, there are ways to stop this and prevent this and stuff, but there are sort of easier ways to prevent or change our heart health.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I worked with Ornish Lifestyle Medicine I've been working with them for 32 years now. And one of the things that I realized, the Ornish program is a combination of a vegan diet with very low fat vegetarian diet and talking about your feelings. So there's group support, talking about your feelings in a group, and also sort of connection to community. And then also exercise, moderate exercise, 3 hours of exercise a week, and strength training is part of that. And then also stress management, which is all from yoga. The stress management is postures, breathing, relaxation, meditation and imagery. And so that makes up the Ornish program. And that program, I realized working in that program, people were reversing their disease process on a regular basis. If they did these four elements, they were not only stopping the progression of the disease, but they were reversing it. People who couldn't walk across a room could now go hiking, and sometimes in the Alps. People, in fact, early on, there was a gentleman that was on the heart transplant list, and his doctors decided to put him in the Ornish program while he was waiting for a heart at our hospital. And within 6 weeks, he came off the heart transplant list. And this became regular in all of the programs. There were many programs. We've had over 50 hospitals that had the program over the period of 30 years. And it was something we would see all the time, that people were reversing disease. And I realized that stress was a major component in chronic illness. And so that's how I got interested and wrote the book, because I felt like, stress, and now they're saying like stress, I think I just read the CDC said that 75 to 90% of all office visits have a stress component. Doctor's visits have a stress component. And I read something that more than 3/4 of adults feel more stressed this year than last year. I mean, I'm like, we're out of COVID and people are feeling more stressed than ever. So stress is really a major contributor. And a lot of stress is this kind of nervous system dysregulation that causes stress, and stress causes nervous system dysregulation. And then there's also stresses, environmental stress. And I think environmental stress is more a contributor in cancer, and heart disease is really affected by lifestyle, like diet, exercise, stress management, and talking about our feelings. So that's really where I got the idea to write the book was, I've been doing this for so long and working with people for so long and seeing these miraculous changes. I just really felt like there needed to be a book, because a lot of people talk about stress management, or there's classes for managing stress that are all didactic. But I felt like these practices are all, they're all evidence-based. When I started, there was no research about the practices, but now there's so much research about these very specific stress management practices. And they have such a broad reach in the world of health that I felt like it was really important for people to have this kind of little guidebook into what really does it mean to manage stress. And even though people say, oh, I manage my stress by, like I said earlier, by boating or knitting or playing music, or all of those are great, but they're not tools to retrain the nervous system. And these that I outline in the book are really very specific practices that retrain the nervous system and mindset.
Yeah, and your original title was Stress Less. I guess that was a bit more negative focused, but it does sort of explain exactly what the book is about. So that is helpful to kind of know the original title. And we can stress less in real time, or maybe it might take 20 minutes or a couple days to kick in. But it also, all of these practices that we're talking about today and in your book, they also make us more kind of resilient and able to manage the stress when it hits us like a storm. For some reason, for example, yesterday, it was my second day here in Kuala Lumpur, and I was very irritable and sensitive. I don't know what was going on. Could have been a number of things, but I was sort of, for example, I went to 7-Eleven and I went to go buy some drinks, non-alcoholic ones. And the price was like double what I thought it was. And I was like, whoa, no. I gave you the money. And like, da, 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 da. And then I went back and, he mislabeled the drinks were in the wrong part. Sometimes they do that. They put the freaking, this drink in the wrong section, so it looks cheaper than it is. And that kind of set me off. And then another one was, I was looking for the pool in this hotel, and there was no signage for it. And I was like, "Where's the pool? Where's the pool?" I was going up and down and around, and where's the pool? And then when I just asked them, I was like, "Where's the pool?" And of course, in an irritable voice. But then I was like, "You should put some signage up." Da 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 da. Like, what is going on? I'm like prepping for this like loving conversation today. I'm on vacation. The day before I was fine, but that day yesterday I was just like all snappy and stuff. But then I did look at your principles, and then just knowledge of them did calm me down. But had I maybe been more aware of them at 7-Eleven before I barked at the guy or barked at the lady at the front desk. It would have made me feel better, and certainly would have made them feel better. So I'm sorry, guys. I was a bit stressed out, and I don't know why, but these tools certainly do help. And doing them more and more probably also makes us less prone to snapping, etc.
Yeah, I have I always say that, it's really important not to try to take swimming lessons when you're drowning. And so I feel like these practices, that's why they're practices. We do them so that our nervous system is more regulated and we don't have those kinds of outbursts. And I often, I'll notice if I'm getting, if I start sort of cussing under my breath when I'm in traffic, I'm like, oh, did I, did I, did I was I doing my practice the last few days? I may have like skipped out early. I may have done 10 minutes instead of 30 minutes, and I use it as kind of like a way of taking the temperature, like, oh, I probably wasn't doing, and my kids will always laugh. They'll be like, cause I lose my keys all the time, and they'll hear me running around the house, and they'll say, nanny cam, like, we're going to show everybody, this is you running around. And I'll always laugh and I'll say, well, you should see me when I don't practice. I mean, I'm so much, it really makes a huge difference. And that's that's one of the things that people notice right away when they do these practices for a week or two. They'll notice immediately, that they sleep better and that they're much less likely to lash out. Things that used to bother them don't bother them in the same way. And those are the things that that I look for when I'm working with people, when they're using these practices to help with their own health and well-being. If they say things like, yeah, I used to get mad at this kind of stuff and now I don't, I'll always be like, well, that's a sign that there's healing happening.
Yeah. Before we go, there's a couple more pillars that we didn't really dig into that I hope we can. One is movement. We did talk about it, but specifically, you emphasize gentle movements and moderate, light exercise. We've been pushed into this idea that we need to like exercise hard or run these marathons, and that's the best way to do it. But it sounds like what you're saying is that's not necessarily the best way. It could be, but there are likely easier and more gentle ways to do it.
Yeah. I mean, marathon runners are not, when you look at people in the blue zones, you've probably heard about blue zones.
Mm-hmm.
They are not marathon runners. They're people that usually have to walk in their daily life, sort of moderately. They have to walk up a hill. They have to walk to the market. So it's moderate exercise. It's moderate lifestyle. Yeah. The truth is that if when we push ourselves, it's contraindicated for healing. Like we want to be moving, but we want to be moving with compassion, moving with compassion and understanding. And the movements that, a lot of people, when they used to come into our program, our lifestyle change program, they knew about yoga and they were doing hot yoga. And I would say, well, if you want to do like power yoga, that's okay, but do that as your exercise and don't do it as your yoga practice because that's not what we're doing. Our movements are slow and gentle. They help articulate joints. They help with a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of strength. But for the most part, they're about moving inward and listening and being able to pay attention to the information the body's offering you about yourself. When we move, our traumas are stored in our muscles or stored in our bones, And so as we move, those things kind of get unleashed and kind of come forward. And if we cultivate this kind of ability to bear witness without labels or judgments, or comments, those traumas and those things that we've stored can come forward and just kind of dissipate in time. And it's this kind of gentleness with which we approach the movement that's really important.
And one last pillar that you talk about is imagery or the use of the imagination. For example, you used to have a fear of flying, but you used imagery to help turn that into a more positive, less stressful experience. You also mentioned how we can change the airflow through our nostrils through our imagination. Talk about imagery, maybe is happening simultaneously along with some of these other pillars, such as the breath or being out in nature, etc. Or maybe it's something we just do independently. But yeah, tell us how you use imagery and how the people maybe you're helping have used it and how we can do it for ourselves.
Well, we're using it all the time. Everybody's using imagery all the time. We just don't even realize it, that we're creating our future
Right.
by what we're putting our attention to right now. But
Yeah.
also, if anybody, I used to say whenever I would speak publicly, I'd always say, people would be like, I don't know how to image. They have such a pained look on their face when they say it. And I'll say, well, have you ever worried about anything ever in your life? And they're like, yeah, I'm a great worrier. And I said, well, if you're a good worrier, you're a good imager because it's the same exact process. Worrying is a form of imagery. It's a repetition of
Yeah.
a thought pattern or a process. And so we can use that kind of imagery to assist us and to help us and to heal us. We can imagine ourselves. I tell the story in my book about a woman that was my next door neighbor, and I used to talk to her about, I said, I work in a program and we use imagery for healing. And she said, well, when I was a little girl, my father died of cancer and I was only 4 years old. And then I was diagnosed with, was it leukemia? I think it was leukemia. And she said, I knew that if I was to die too, it would kill my mother. So she said, so I used to imagine little fairies coming in and healing me, like they had little lights in my inside of me, and I would imagine them going through my body with these little lights. And she said, isn't that crazy? But she was 50 years old at the time. She said, but it worked. And I got better. And I thought, wow, that's imagery. And we used it, in the Ornish program all the time. We would have people imagine their hearts, if they had a blockage, we would have them imagine it opening. And the truth is like our minds control the muscles that surround the artery walls, just like our minds control that tissue that's much like erectile tissue in our nose. When we think about it, we can change our dominance. We can also relax the muscles that surround the artery walls, and then blood and energy can flow more freely. So there's so many ways we can use imagery, but we can also just imagine a positive outcome. And even if it doesn't change the outcome, it can change our worry about the outcome. It can change the damage that we do with negative imagery. So we use a positive imagery. There's so much being taught about imagery right now. I know Joe Dispenza is doing so much. He's got a book about placebo, and I think it's a brilliant book because it's exactly what I know to be true, that we have so much more agency in our own health and well-being, and especially when we use imagery, when we bring imagery to the table.
Yeah, and you're totally right. We're always using the imagination every moment of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And not to turn this into a philosophy lesson, but I did study philosophy back in university, and it reminds me of, for example, Immanuel Kant would always say, "We cannot see the world in itself. We never have direct access to reality, to the world itself. We're always filtering everything we perceive through our biological apparatus, our eyes and our senses and stuff. So that's already kind of changing the relationship between us and the actual world itself, but also our ideas and our imaginations are always painting and filtering things. So it's almost like we're wearing these glasses that have different shapes and filters on them. And we think this is reality, but half of it or more than half of it's coming from within ourselves. And we can't exactly change our eyes, but we can kind of change those filters on those glasses by changing our imagination and the way we are thinking about things. And that will literally change aspects of our environment and the world around us, the things that we're complaining about. And these philosophers have been thinking about this for centuries. And the general consensus is imagination is painting a big piece of our world and our life.
Yeah, and we can't always change the situation, what's happening around us, but we can always change the way we react and respond to that. And that's what we have control over. We can change how we're thinking about it. And in the yoga tradition, there's something called pratipakshibhavana, which is like being able to turn a negative into a positive. And it doesn't mean like you just pretend you're positive all the time. It means you actually see yourself, and you see what's happening and you see your negative response and you make a conscious decision to shift that. And that takes imagery to do that. We have to think about it and think about shifting it, think about the opposite. So it's taking something and flipping it into the opposite. And that's called, in the tradition of yoga, pratipakshibhavana, which is one of my favorite sutras and the yoga sutras. I love it because it provides so much hope and inspiration for us being able to change the way we think and feel about what's
Yeah.
happening.
Speaking of imagery, but also connecting it back to this listening to ourselves and this compassion, if you could use a kind of metaphor or imagery to explain this piece of yourself, this core, loving, this is me, this is my heart. How would you describe it? I felt this deep thing inside of myself that's like holding me and loving me and accepting me and not judging me and keeping me alive. And it's like this will to live, but this will to love or something. It's like, oh, even when I'm like on the back of a motorbike and I think I'm gonna die or I'm whatever freaking out, it's like, hey, if you listen, it's there. And for me, it's like this. I don't know why. I don't even have a dog. I'm slightly scared of dogs, but for me, it's like this old doggy in the center of my abdomen. And it's like, oh, just sitting there and it's loving me and it's protecting me. And I don't know why it's an old little doggy, but that's what it is for
Yeah.
me. What is it for you?
I love that you said that. That's so fun to imagine that. I don't have it in an image like an animal or anything like that, but I feel very connected to my own inner healer, my own inner wisdom, and my own intuition. And I feel like it's palpable. And some people call it angels or God or a power animal or whatever, but it is a presence that I feel very
Yeah,
connected to. And I think, for me, it is in the center of my own heart. I feel it,
me too.
this very spacious, calm place.
Yeah.
And it's always there. It's always there for all of us. We just need the tools to get back to it. And that's what I think the book is really about, is what are the tools that help you find that again.
Yeah, the book is The Centered Heart, which is a perfect title. People can get that book wherever they get books. How else can people connect with you or learn more about all of this?
I have a website called yourcenteredheart.com, and there's free practices there that you can download, and they're yours forever. There's what we have a 30-day challenge that is something you can pay for, and it is 30 days of practices if you want to really start to retrain yourself. It's much more support than the free practices, but the free practices are wonderful, and I really encourage everybody to go and download those because they're yours and they're really helpful. And there's also just what's on that website are a lot of other kind of little fun little tidbits. So I encourage you to go to yourcenteredheart.com.
Well, the sun has risen over here. I guess the sun has set over there. It's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much. I guess good morning to me and
Mhm.
good night to you.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you for inviting me into this beautiful conversation.